Okay, good morning, everybody. I was waiting a minute or so just to let people rush in and get to their computers and turn everything on. Today, I am delighted to introduce to you Professor Ashiraf Coovadia, who is the head of the Department of Paediatrics, academic head. And amongst other interests that he has is improving student learning. So without further ado, I'm going to ask him to describe several of the projects that he has ongoing that interface both with helping staff with developing good learning for students and helping students to learn the way that we want them to learn. Prof Coovadia, thanks for joining us, and we're very interested to hear about the work that you've been doing.
Sure. So first of all, thanks very much, Shira, for inviting me to share some of my experiences and thoughts around this and the fun that I have with it. And I'm hoping that I can entice you and excite you to also dabble a bit with it. But yeah, it's more about sharing what I'm doing currently around AI in two different areas, and then see if we can have a good discussion as well around it. So the two areas that I've thought that I should share with you are the ones that I'm mostly involved with. I am doing some other stuff with AI, but these are the ones I'm doing most of my kind of real work on. One is on history taking and how in pediatrics, history taking, the AI could assist in history taking practices and assessment. And I'll give you some demonstrations of that. In fact, I'll start off with a presentation that I gave to the college on that. And then after that, I'll talk about MCQs, and then we'll do a demo on MCQs and tell you how in the department, we also, for the last 3 years, have been using AI to help us develop our MCQ papers for both the 5th years and 6th years, so the Chem 3s and Chem 4s. And we can talk about the pros and cons of that way of doing things and getting questions done. So I'm just going to share now my presentation on the history taking project.
Thank you.
Because it was a presentation that I did to the college. I'm currently also part of the Colleges of Medicine of South Africa's small working group on AI. And we recently held a webinar where 3 of us presented on different aspects of it. Again, just sharing experiences of how we're using it and for what effect in terms of teaching and assessment. As far as the college is concerned, the Colleges of Medicine, their particular focus is on assessment. How can AI help us with assessments? So this is this really is the talk about the Chem 2 research project. I'm going to see if I can. Yeah, there we are. Okay, so it started off about a year ago when there was a call, as usually happens, from UME asking for consultants, lecturers to put up their hand to help Chem 2 students with a research project. Anything that someone's already involved with that the Chem 2s could get involved with and make a kind of mini project out of it. So I said this might be a good idea to test this whole theory I have on whether an AI and a large language model like ChatGPT could be used to practice and simulate patients. And so students could practice with and improve their history by talking to the AI. And so I got together with a group of students. There are about 8 of them. And this was, as I said, about a year ago. And they were just as enthused and excited about it and we had several meetings to discuss how this project would play out and what was a question we were really trying to answer. And I'll go into the thinking behind what that question was or is. So history taking is probably one of the hardest skills that a clinician has to master, right? Amongst all the other different types of skill sets that they need, history taking takes years actually, but it also takes insight. It takes insight into knowing what pathologies people might experience, and so it comes with experience. And how you take the history and how you actually get that information from a variety of caregivers or patients with different styles, and also how to talk to patients in a way that doesn't sound like jargon, but also not dumbing things down so you're talking down to people. It really is a skill. And you can imagine in our busy environments, our clinical platform, people struggle. They struggle because it's busy, it's noisy, it's rushed. And, in order to get good at being able to take a history and a relevant history and get better at it, you need to have feedback. You need someone to say, well, you could have asked more around this. You could have, why were you going down this line of inquiry and so on. And you also have to be efficient, right? And that comes with a lot of practice. So to practice history taking requires as much immediate feedback as you can get. Now you can imagine in our environments that's a tall challenge, right? A tall order. So we thought, this is our theory, what if the clinician or the student, medical student, talks to a simulated caregiver of a child, okay? And that simulation would serve to allow the student to ask as many questions as they required to a very patient caregiver who doesn't get irritated or annoyed or frustrated with the kind of questions that are being asked. And then the student over time would get better, but provided they got feedback on how that history taking session went. So we designed a study, okay, where we created this bot. It's a history taking in pediatrics assessor bot. And I'm going to give you a sample of a demo of how this works. And if we've got some time at the end, I can show you how you can actually build your own little bots with, at least in ChatGPT, for not a huge amount of money if you're paying for the paid version. This is within the paid version. I must just say here, we were very lucky in that when we thought of this idea last year, I actually reached out to OpenAI through LinkedIn, believe it or not, and made a connection there. Somebody I just didn't know, but I said to them, well, we've got this project with medical students to assess whether history taking is possible, and you can even get an assessment of how good your history taking is. Would you sponsor the study? Would you help us technically to put together the bot, etc.? And they took some time to respond, and I was a bit kind of, I followed up with them a couple of times, and eventually they responded and they said, look, we just don't have the capacity to help you from a technical point of view, but here's some free accounts. They actually offered us up to 100 free accounts and this is the plus accounts, and this is the plus account that's allowed us to have built this history taking bot. It's not really history taking, it's an assessor of history taking, you know what I mean. So I'm very keen to show you a demo of what that sounds like when a student takes the history from the simulated patient. But I need to tell you a little bit more about what happens next before I go into it. So once the student has finished taking a history, and we tell them take as long as you need, but generally it will be about 20 to 30 minutes in any system you want. And it's designed to know that you're a medical student, and it'll give you I think it'll give you a good experience with a almost realistic caregiver in a South African setting, and we've trained it to be in a South African setting. And after that has happened, the transcript of that dialogue that you as a student have with the bot then gets taken and assessed. It gets fed back into an AI assessment tool. In fact, it's the same bot that does the assessment. We've given it a rubric, and it marks how well the student does according to the rubric. And here's the way the study's been designed. We're trying to see how well AI marks that same transcript compared to a human assessor. So I've got 13 human assessors, pediatricians who are experienced in listening to students taking histories at a GEM 4 level, and then comparing the marks that the AI assessor does compared to the human assessor. And then we're looking at a so-called inter-rater reliability, because our theory is that if it rates the history taking session as well as a human and gives reasonable feedback, then students can have a certain level of confidence that they can practice alone and as much as possible on their own with an AI, which is convenient, which is never tiring. And, yes, there is a downside to this, or a shortcoming, in that they're not having to see a real person and read the body language, etc. But I think it doesn't replace teaching, history taking with a real patient, but certainly I think we believe as a student group and myself that it will have a place. So that said, in fact, I told you about the study design. There's 13 human assessors. Each of them has been given several of these transcripts, each transcript. So we've already enrolled 30 students and got about 34 transcripts, and we've given them to the humans, and each transcript is measured or being evaluated by 3 different humans independently, because we want to see what the intra-rater reliability is between the humans. And then we're also running it, in fact, 4 times in AI, because when you run something in AI, it'll give you a different mark each time, but provided it's within a certain range, we think it will, hopefully, there's a reasonable intra-rater reliability, and then we're hoping the intra-rater between human and will be reasonable or good. But we don't know the answer to that yet. So I am going to stop sharing there because I want you to get a flavor of what it sounds like for the student, right? So let's go into here. Okay, so imagine me as the final year medical student enrolled onto the study, and I am going to speak. This was a game changer, being able to have speech. Good afternoon. I'd like to start a practice session, please.
Great. Which system would you like to focus on today? Respiratory, gastrointestinal, neurological, or another one?
Let's go with neurological.
All right, here we go. Hello, my name is Thuli, and this is my daughter, Ayanda. She's been having strange movements. Who am I speaking to?
Hello, Thuli. My name is Ashraf. I'm a final year medical student, and I'm sorry to hear about Ayanda. How old is Ayanda, and can you tell me more about her symptoms?
Thank you, Ashraf. Ayanda is 6 years old. The movements started last week. They come and go. I don't really know how to explain them. She just kind of jerks suddenly sometimes.
Oh, I see. And have you noticed whether she loses consciousness during that time?
Sometimes it looks like she kind of blanks out for a few seconds. Other times she just jerks but stays awake.
Okay, and can you describe which part of the body have you witnessed this?
Mostly her arms, sometimes one side, sometimes both. Once or twice, her head also kind of nodded forward quickly.
Okay, and you say sometimes she just stares blankly, and other times she's awake. Is she ever awake during these episodes?
Yes, most times she's awake. She'll be talking or playing, then suddenly jerk. After that, she just carries on like nothing happened.
All right, and when did it begin?
It started sometime last week, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay, has she had any other symptoms, like having a headache, fever, anything else you're worried about?
No fever that I noticed. She did say her head was sore once, but it went away quickly. Other than that, she seems fine.
And can you tell me about her past medical history and any past surgical history that she's had?
She's never had any surgery. She's been a healthy child mostly. I don't remember her being in hospital before.
Okay, can you tell me about her birth?
She was born at Bara. It was a normal delivery.
Any more details about her birth?
What exactly would you like to know about her birth?
Like her weight, and did she cry at birth?
Her weight was 3.1 kilos. Yes, she cried right after birth.
Okay, I'd like to switch to the preceptor mode now, please.
Got it? Switching to preceptor mode. Ashraf, based on the history you've taken. First, what is your assessment of Ayanda's condition? And second, what are your differential diagnoses? Once you've answered those two, I'll give you detailed feedback using the AIBO3 NEAT format.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'm just giving you a sense of the sort of interaction one has, but it will give you feedback, and you can have a further discussion of the differentials, and it actually does give quite a lot of feedback, but can also give you a mark according to the rubric. So just going back to the presentation, and then just a second. So yeah, as I said, we've collected 34 transcripts. So the students had these engagements. They game 3 students this year. They were game 2s last year. So this year they took the bot basically on their phones and were able to talk to the game 4 students and have these transcripts produced that are currently being evaluated for how well the AI marks them and what sort of feedback the AI gives versus humans, with the hope that it's not too different from what humans would human assessors or pediatricians would mark, and therefore have students feel like, well, I can practice with this thing because it actually is quite realistic, bearing in mind some of the shortcomings. Okay, so that's the first project. I'm going to stop there. I'm wondering whether I should just pause there for any immediate questions. We can have a discussion later, and then I'll go on to the MCQ part because I think it's gone pretty quick.
Anybody got any questions right now, or do you want to hold them over until a little bit later?
That's fine. I see one hand, Sarah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much. This is really interesting. Just a question around some of the logic. So obviously this is going to have to rely on, as you mentioned, the communication, the narrative communication. Yeah. And so, for instance, in what you just did, if you were interacting with a person, they could, for instance, maybe demonstrate the jerking or something like that, where you'll be missing on that. So I'm wondering, yes, is the thinking here like really almost like a scaffolding approach to allow students to play around before they get to the irritable real people?
That's exactly right. I like the way you put it.
Just in terms of sequencing, because I can see the value, but also the limitations, not a replacement for real people, real language challenges and stuff like that. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. It is a sort of scaffolding, because I think from our point of view, we think that the more opportunities they get to just practice asking questions and covering the breadth of the things that they've got, all the subheadings, even if they're making lots of silly mistakes and they're not on point all the time, that's fine. They, the feedback that will be given will be things like, you covered immunization well, but you forgot about developmental history in pediatrics. And next time, go further into, birth history and so on. So it is a sort of scaffolding. It can't replace that human history taking. Absolutely. Yeah. But it just is, from my point of view anyway, I think it just gives them such an opportunity to practice ad lib, on this. And also practice on cases that they're not going to come in contact with frequently in the clinical space. So, for example, rheumatology cases, they'll see them very infrequently. A child with, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, idiopathic arthritis, they're hardly going to see. But how do you ask those questions? What are the sort of questions you ask? And the bot's been good at it's now been tuned to really try and extract that information from the student. So when I said, tell me more about the birth history in the beginning, without it being fine-tuned, it would just rattle off the whole everything. It would be volunteering much more information than what happens in real life. So it will say that the child was born at Baragwanath Hospital. It was 3.2 kilograms. It cried at birth. APGARs were 9 and 10. Went home at 6 hours after birth, etc. And you couldn't stop it. So now if I had vague questions like, tell me more about the symptoms, it will start. Often it will say, like what exactly do you want to know? So hopefully it's giving the students a bit more of a challenge and getting them to interact in this way so that they become hopefully a little bit somewhat more refined when they actually go onto the clinical platform and they encounter real patients. So it's complementary. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go on to the second part, and then again we can come back to talking about some of the pros and cons of what we found in the study, or some of the challenges rather. So in terms of the MCQ, I'm going to also share the screen now. It's not a presentation, but it's a demonstration. Let's see if I can go on to that. Yeah. Okay. So let's go. So this was the history taking bot, and now I'm going to go into the MCQ. So these are all on the left here, all specific bots, or also known as my GPTs, which created several different type of GPTs with different purposes. So this one helps us in the Department of Pediatrics create MCQ questions for the GEM 3s and GEM 4s. They have 4 papers a year for the GEM 3. Well, we have in the department 4 papers a year for the 5th year students and 4 papers for the 6th year students. And it really takes a lot of time to produce new questions. And so what we've been doing for the last 3 years is using AI to help us generate large numbers of questions, and then going through those questions to sift through them and determine which ones we think are usable and which ones are not so great. So let me give you an example. Let's say, so this has already been, so this what you can do when you create a MyGPT, a so-called MyGPT, and this one is a bot called MediQuiz, you can, I hope you can see this, you can give it a whole lot of instructions about what you want, who's it designed for. And so it's a kind of a super prompt. They call it configure. It's a kind of a very detailed prompt. It's not just a one-liner. It's a whole lot of things explaining what you want. And then you can upload documents, which is really the beauty of it. So if, for example, this is the textbook they use for, the one we recommend, then I want questions to come from here. And then I've uploaded examples of papers that we've used in the past. So it gets a sense of the level of difficulty of the papers. And then I've uploaded something called the PEDS core competencies, which is a document that just describes the levels of, almost like a Bloom's taxonomy, looking at the levels of knowledge that the student at 5th year should know and 6th year. And then there's what we coined our own phrase called the CRAPO framework, which I'll tell you a little bit more about when I'll show you the example of what the CRAPO framework is. It's about picking up crap questions. Okay, so, or rather fixing crap questions. So let's create an MCQ. So it's once you create your GPT, you can have a few prompts that are just there. You don't have to write them each time. So for example, there. So it's searching that knowledge base, which I showed you, and there's the question it's creating. And that was literally created in 2 seconds, right? And it gives you the answer, and it gives you an explanation, a little bit of why that's a good answer. And then it also tells you where in the blueprint does it fit in. And it did a quick, no, it hasn't done a CRAPO check. So I'll say, do a CRAPO check. So what does CRAPO stand for? So is it clear? Is the question clear enough? Is it relevant? Is it appropriate? And is it plausible? And because we found from experience in the last couple of years that it often gives you very poor questions. Sometimes it's not relevant. Sometimes it's not appropriate for the level, etc. Now you might think that it'll always rate itself as giving excellent questions, but that isn't always the case. Many a time it will pick up its own problems in the question. Okay, so for example, I did this just before the talk and I said, give me an example where you created a question and it wasn't so good. So let me show you this example here. Okay, so here's a question. A 7-year-old girl presents with painful swollen knees and fever. Anti-streptolizin O-titer is elevated. What is the most likely diagnosis? And it gives you these 4 options. And one of them is correct. But then once it does its own evaluation, it says, well, the clarity, the term swollen knees and fever is too vague. The term course of joint involvement, systemic symptoms are unclear. The relevance, it's relevant, but the question doesn't challenge clinical decision making. So it critiques itself, we think and hope. And then once it goes through that, it gives you a revised version, which is meant to have addressed all those things. And we certainly found that once we've done the CRAPO and we've said, think again, think hard, try and fix your own mistakes. And it does do a better job for some reason. Why I didn't do it in the first place, I don't know, but we kind of run this as a second check. So yeah, it can create questions. So what we do then in the department is we create hundreds of these questions across the whole blueprint of our paper, and then we have a 2-day workshop of between 5 and 10 pediatricians across the hospitals, and we look through all these questions and we try very hard to work through them quickly and say yay or nay, this is a good question, it's appropriate for the level and we're going to use it, or it's not so good. We've got a third category, which is it's not so good as it is, it can be fixed. Those are the ones that take up a lot of our time. And much as I try and tell people that we can create literally hundreds of questions in a few minutes, don't waste time fixing a question too much, just move on. The moment we get stuck into a question, there's this strong desire to fix it when it just, you feel like it's nearly there, and that takes a huge amount of our time. But that having been said, if we didn't do this system of having AI generate a whole lot of questions that we worked on, and we had to work on them de novo by ourselves, we wouldn't get through that workshop in those 2 days. So yeah, that's essentially how we're using it in the department. I also do this often. I take a paper and I run it through this and I say, can you check the blueprint? So can you please check what the blueprint, and it will quickly look through the paper, 100 questions, and list all the questions and the themes that it's covering, and it will match it against our own blueprint. So let me give you an example. Let me see if I can show you what our blueprint looks like. CQ blueprint, give me 1 second and I will change slides and show you our blueprint. Just going on to another document now so that I can give you an example. Okay, so this is it, game 3 and game 4. Okay, let me stop sharing that. So, when you do it manually and you go through your paper and you start listing how many are adolescent questions, how many are allergies, and this, for each of these papers, this is the number that is desired. You can never get it perfect, but we try and strive to have a paper that mirrors this blueprint. Then when you actually start counting and tallying up against a paper, it takes a lot of time. I mean, this just to do a blueprint check can take an hour of one's time. But when you run it through AI, not that it doesn't make mistakes, it can. You have to check it, but it's much quicker. It helps if you ask it to put a table for you that says, please put down the questions that you've indicated are adolescent and what the answers are, so that you can quickly spot it and say, oh yeah, that is an adolescent question, or that is an allergy question, and so on. So it helps from a blueprinting point of view. It helps from, I think, a quality control point of view, because I've also done uploading a paper and asking it to weed out really poor questions, doing a sort of a crapo on the whole paper. And yeah, it can do that. It does make mistakes, and sometimes you wonder whether you're wasting more time running through this and reading through what it says versus just checking it yourself. And for me, it's all about learning and learning how to work with it and find where it's actually adding value and where it isn't. So yeah, those are the two use cases for us in pediatrics, and one that I'm very heavily involved with. The history AIinTeaching project is almost done. We've actually collected all the data, and we're going to be sending it to the biostatistician now to compare the results. And the MCQ project, as I said, it's been running for 3 years, and every year we just try and tweak it a bit more and make it a little bit better. I can tell you the College of Medicine of South Africa is also, certainly in pediatrics, is also using it to, I'm not part of that, but others are using it to produce questions, because it's such a quick and efficient way. But it's certainly one that still requires a lot of human oversight, because it does sometimes often give you rubbish questions. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there, because that's my story.
And a very exciting story it is too, Ashiraf.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. I'm sure that there are lots of people here who are logged on, who are very keen on doing exactly what you're doing. So maybe people do have technical questions. I'm going to start off with Stuart.
Hi, Prof. Thank you. This is a really exciting project in the research. I'm very excited to hear the results you get. I wanted to ask, obviously, we teach history taking as well, and the students are always asking for opportunities to practice, and this seems to offer an incredibly exciting opportunity. Practically, I was interested to know, if you want to roll out to a point where students are practicing, would they have to develop their own little My GPT that's been, obviously you've prompted and set that up, or would you effectively be sharing that My GPT with students that they want to practice? I'm sort of interested in how this sort of rolls out to students, because I'm afraid of saying, oh, go practice with AI. And you've obviously run into a lot of examples where it needed to be trained. So I'm interested in how you sort of navigate that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, the scale up from that, we haven't really thought about what we would do, but you're quite right. You'd have to try and train it. But it's not too difficult. That prompt so there's two ways. One is we can just share the link. So the link that I've got, when you create My GPT, you can make it public so anyone can access it anywhere, anytime for no cost. And as long as, but this is the big thing, is that they need to be on the paid version, unfortunately, right now. So the free version, you can't train it, the free version. At the moment, you can't. You just have a chat. And unless you put in the super prompt in the chat and then just use that chat, which I haven't really tried, but that might be the way. But all we would be able to say at the end of this bot was good or poor or whatever at history-taking assessment. We can't speak for all of how ChatGPT functions or all of LLMs. So you're quite right. When we come to scaling up, we'd have to think carefully about where we direct, how we get students to interact with it, what sort of training of the model would be needed.
Shada, do you want to come in on the same question?
Shada?
Hi, Prof. Thanks for this presentation. I attended your one for CMSA, so I'm happy to have attended this one because you've added the MCQs, which was quite nice.
Oh,
so
okay.
I just wanted to clarify on your customization of your custom GPT. What would be very interesting for me is the actual part of the prompt that you added to limit the custom bot, because we also have challenges with our bot with just freely giving information without any restrictions. So I think that would be interesting. For the history taking bot, did you put up cases in your data sources? So it's using its own knowledge base. Did you evaluate how good these cases are?
So that's we don't have a separate evaluation on them. We're hoping that our human history taking, the pediatricians who are marking the scripts are giving us comments on that. They've often given us comments on what they thought about the realism of the case and so on. But that's a separate evaluation. My own experience is that the cases are very realistic and they're very coherent. They're logical, and they're not just sort of all over the place, haphazard sort of symptoms and so on. They tie together quite well. That's just my experience.
Yeah, and the MCQs, I mean, we already use it for the question generator for MCQs. Do you have any challenges with reference intervals, units? I'm sure your custom prompt did tell it to use SI units for results that they're getting, like lab results, for example, how to present the results, basically.
No, we haven't. I mean, I think we have said it must be SI units, and no, I haven't seen that as a problem that's been flagged.
You haven't had issues with the intervals and things like that. And I'm from the lab, hence I'm bringing this up because I noticed this in some of our MCQs as a challenge, is that the reference intervals are not always appropriate, but it's not very inaccurate. It's just not always appropriate. That's others it will give you stupid milligrams per deciliter.
I can see that being fixable if you upload the document. If you upload it in that knowledge hub and say stick to these reference ranges and this units, don't deviate from this, and then it generally will do that.
Yeah, it does. But the RAG system does sometimes deviate, because I mean, I just saw this now in one of ours. It did deviate a bit with the reference interval in terms of its interpretation. And that for me was very confusing, because the chatbot we're using, we can see the user interactions in the background. So we could see what the students were asking the chatbot. And I saw the answer and I was like, what is this thing? I'm sure it confused the student there, because we had a different reference interval for that. It was acid base, and it gave them a different interpretation from its own base knowledge. So I think it might have been how it was listed in the document. So that was just a consideration that we had to think about, but it's just something we experienced. I just wanted to bring it up here.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out on our side when we're asking these questions where we're getting these very weird values that it gives us. I haven't seen that as a reason for not including it as a question. I don't know. But Shoaib, I see two people who are also at the workshop. So Shoaib and Tanya, they're very much part of the workshop, throwing questions out or trying to fix them. Shoaib, go ahead.
Thanks, Ashraf. But Shira, there's a question from Sarah in the chat box. Maybe we should take that first.
Oh, okay.
Yes, happy to have that discussion. Sarah, the safe rule of thumb they're saying is anything that you put into an open source AI is open source. So university documents, university research should not be shared on OpenAI. We have Microsoft Copilot, which restricts the kind of data that we upload to the university. So that's the one you should use if you're worried about sensitive information. But nothing that would contravene the POPIA Act should go, and nothing of your own confidential or university-based research should go onto OpenAI. What Ashraf's talking about here, though, is something different, because the paid-for versions do have ring fencing. What's the word? Mark, you can tell me what it is. The security rails, what do they call them? Anyway,
like guardrails.
The guardrails. So the fact remains that that once you start on paid for versions, then you do have a little bit more control about where that information goes. But at the moment, the suggestion from the university is to use Microsoft Copilot if you're going to be doing any work that requires AI assistance.
Yeah, and then there are options to say don't train the model. So you can also use it and switch off the don't train the AI model. But I think the whole security question is still one that, Sarah, is a very valid question, because my belief is that the paid version that we're using has allowed us enough to keep our things secure and not be shared. Others may disagree and say, no, that's still not completely secure. So we have our MCQ papers there. Will it be hacked? Will it go out into the public? It may be a risk. It's a calculated risk. But I certainly don't upload any personal sensitive information, individuals' private sort of information like CVs and that sort of thing, on other bots that we've got. Shoaib?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that clarity. And just pulling on from what Shira was mentioning about the Copilot that Wits has subscribed to, I think if you look at what Copilot, I think it's called MS365 Copilot or something like that. And it has limitations in the sense that it has the faster version of GPT. I think it's 4.40 mini or something like that. It's not the more advanced version. That's the first one. The second one is that it requires, so if we have to create a GPT specifically designed and trained on MCQs or history taking, etc., the functionality is actually called Copilot Studio. And Copilot Studio actually is exactly what, Ashiraf, you've been trying to do. Unfortunately, we don't have a subscription for that. What it does is it will only use what we have fed it with. And the difference with the Studio version and the MyGPT version is that it still goes out of the uploaded knowledge to find an answer and seek the answer. So, for example, we've uploaded the illustrated textbook, and that's quite a hefty knowledge base. So, for it to absorb all of those elements, it will require a lot of resources. So I think what it does, it just takes the headings and the subheadings rather than the detailed aspects of knowledge into that. So I just wanted to make the two distinctions. That if we're using Copilot, and I think Copilot Studio would be appropriate for our settings, and it can automate the process quite seamlessly in the sense that the work that we do would resonate with the students, and then the students can actually develop their own kind of learning pathways for self-learning. So they would know where they are, what they're doing, where they left off, and build on their prior existing knowledge as well, and challenge the bot in the sense that I don't agree with you with this. Can you find additional information that actually heard in a word round that mentioned this? And it would do that. And I think for the way you have designed this, I think it's wonderful. A starting point, it gives iterative learning opportunities for students, especially in the history taking aspects. Test it and see how well they can actually apply it in real life. I think in future, as we start learning more about incorporating large language models into our learning systems, the next level, I think one of our staff members mentioned agentic approaches to building the bots, and Copilot Studio allows us to actually do that and ring fence it and sandbox it in such a way that it doesn't go out and it stays within its parameters of knowledge, whatever we've fed it, and it can interact with the student in graphic format, in flowcharts, in all the the learning aspects of teaching and training. So I just wanted to just make that comment. What I've also noticed in the MyGPT areas is if those knowledge bases that we put in are too complex, I tend to GPT tends to forget about them, and then you just have to remind it in a conversation to say that it has been uploaded and please can you review that. So maybe it's an old version, maybe 4.0 may have done a better job at it, and I see now the 3.0 O3 has also been released, which is a much more powerful, but it has limited credits for use, which adds a little more reasoning, deeper insights into questions. And the more prompts you provide them, the better responses you get. I tried that with some of the MCQ questions, and it's very, very different from the 4 versions.
Okay.
Sorry, this is just a comment. It's not a
question.
Thank you.
No, everyone's experiences on this is helpful so that we all learn what works and what we could be using. I think there's still, for me, the question around security of all those things that we put up there is still one we need more guidance on from the university and others on what we can upload, how we secure it, and yeah, that for me is still an area of work for us.
Yeah, agreed. I think, it's more than information flood. There have been some memes going around in the last couple of weeks about how you shouldn't be polite to your AI model. So don't say hi and don't say please, because those words are just fouling up the system. And I thought that's actually quite a comment on our society. How would you train your AI to filter out extraneous words? And it's a bit sad to think that those are the things that people are doing, that the AI is saying is just too much. This discussion of, are we getting to post-humanity? Are we going to turn into people who can speak better to bots because we've been trained to speak by bots? Shaida?
Interesting.
So sorry, I just wanted to add on to your comment about the about the please and thank you. Yeah, so I mean that is an important thing, because it has, the reason they told us not to do it is because of money. So it's costing OpenAI quite a bit of money for the GPTs to respond to our politeness. So that's it. It has nothing to do with how we humans should be interacting with one another. It's just a cost-saving measure that they say, you know what, you shouldn't be polite to the GPTs because it's costing us too much for them to respond to you. And I do find that quite sad, but it is the reality now.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I think if in this particular situation, when we train people how to communicate, then it'll be very complicated to try and do this history-taking session, because you really are in a simulation and you're simulating another patient. And I think in this case, it doesn't apply. They would have to, I know that, that they're talking to a simulated patient in this case, so it doesn't apply. I think.
I'm seeing that's exactly what Sarah's saying in the chat. She's saying what you're trying to do is teach communication. So that's not really how we want them to react. And Shaida's picked up on something that the Fizzlebot succeeded in, and that is, have you tried other South African languages?
So I have. Well, I've played around with it, not in the history-taking project, but just in the wards around. When we've had, there's another project that's underway that Prof Arun Saluji has been leading, where we've given our final year students, we've taught them how to use an LLM, and in this case, again, it was ChatGPT, to assist them when they are in an OSCE, to see if they come up with a better assessment than if they don't use the AI. And we were comparing one arm to another. So they were randomized to using the AI or not. Where the other languages came in is when we went to the patients to talk to the patients, to explain to them what the study was all about. It's actually very, very complicated to talk to patients about the ethics of this, and you think it's simple, but how do you explain to a patient, there's this machine talks to you, it'll tell you something. It was very complicated. And so what we did then was we tried out I tried out saying, can you speak in Chichewa to this mother from Malawi? And it goes into absolutely brilliant, fluent Chichewa. One of the medical students who was on the study said, but I speak Venda, let's try it. And she had a conversation with it in Venda. And I've tried on now a number of occasions on the ward rounds where, with permission, said to patients, they speak broken English, but can you speak in whatever, Portuguese or whatever? And I think that's going to be another utility for us, because for me, it's like Google Translate on steroids, because it actually speaks very fluently like a person, very conversational. You can stop it, and then you can ask for the transcript, or explain to the mother that this is what we're trying to do. And so I have tried. It's amazing, a wide range of languages that you can use it on.
So I really like your idea of saying that's almost something to incorporate in our clinical training, in students' experiences in hospitals. Do you have a particular mandate for the type of device that will do that kind of thing? Or is it just that if it can support the LLM, then it doesn't matter what phone the student is using?
No, I think it does. The phone does it. I mean, the experience I have is just with ChatGPT and the voice function in ChatGPT. But I think it doesn't matter what phone it is. The device is not the issue. It's the app. Yeah.
Go ahead. Can you help us out with the technical aspects here?
Yeah, so the processing happens remotely. So it happens on the ChatGPT servers. So all you need to be able to do is, as long as you're getting a response and your phone can handle the voice response and it's got that bandwidth, then it's good enough. Also on the multiple language thing, that there's quite an involved chatbot being used by UJ at the moment, and they're busy testing it sort of word for word, response for response against a number of South African languages, and they're getting very good responses. So there are other options like that where you can have almost private databases. So the language model is based on your own material that you give it, which means the chance of hallucination is a lot low. And you can actually set the amount of hallucination that's allowed. There's a lot of projects being done on Amazon at the moment. And Amazon is pushing them because what they want to eventually do is for you to be able to rent out your models for other people to use. And they, of course, make money on the usage of their service. So they're providing quite a lot of research, and they're providing access to a number of different LLMs to see which ones are more appropriate. So you could literally try it on a bunch of LLMs and see whether any of them give you better responses or not. And there's now a thing called UbuntuNet, which is an amalgamation of both Southern and Eastern African universities, which have managed to get a special deal from Amazon to try this out. So it might be worthwhile approaching, and especially if you're ever looking at using your expertise to market yourselves. Because what's happened there is the stuff that's being built up in Zambia at the moment has now been, the platform is open sourced, but the content is being leased out if you want to use it. And they're using it for a certain amount of history taking processes, but they haven't tuned it as well to filter out the higher level questions. So that is the quality of questions that I've seen here are much higher than the ones that I've seen coming out of Zambia.
Well, that's very encouraging. Thanks, Mark. It's nice to know, Ashraf, that the way that you guided the LLM is giving the kinds of results that you're getting. I do want to encourage people. It was
quite an iterative process. I mean, we did a pilot and we went through quite a number of iterations to get that configure, I call it the super prompt, right? And it still can behave erratically and unpredictably. So no matter how much you can train it, it can still go off script. And I think it's not like we think. For me, I've learned that it's not like we think. It's not like a machine that just will give you an algorithm the same response each time. You can ask the same question, and on different days and even different minutes, it will give you a completely different answer. Even marking will be different. So just as much as even a human marker, depending on their mood, will give a mark on a transcript, the AI does the same. It behaves in a way like a human, very unpredictably, no matter how much you train it. So it doesn't behave like a machine with a simple algorithm.
Which is really interesting. And I want to thank you very much for sharing your not only experiences, but advice and thinking with all of us here. And I've no doubt that you've sparked a lot of enthusiasm amongst people who have popped in to listen today. And we look forward to all working together to really assist our students in developing these skills so that as the whole world moves forward, they're able to move forward with us. So I want to thank everybody for coming today, for coming to listen, Prof Coovadia for really giving up not only his time, but his expertise and his thinking. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Shira. Thanks, everyone.